Radio Sussex.
But first this morning at 8:07, our top story. Staff and patients at Eastbourne's District General Hospital angry over plans to downgrade it further.
We cannot carry on with this situation we've got today. It's going to end up with lost lives.
More than 100 people attended a heated meeting last night over plans to relocate the on-site consultant paediatrician from Eastbourne to the Conquest at Hastings. Meanwhile, maternity services have been suspended until at least the end of the month.
The changes need to be stopped, they need to be consulted on, so that local people get to have a say on the services that they need and deserve.
That's local Lib Dem councillor and prospective parliamentary candidate Josh Babarinde, who called that meeting. He wants the changes to be paused.
We're worried that more children are going to have to go over to Hastings to get care. We can't ignore those people, we have to listen to them, and that's what tonight was all about. What I want to happen now is for the Health Secretary to use her powers to intervene and call this decision in. This has been done without public consultation, and that's not good enough.
Be speaking to Josh live in just a moment, but first let's go to our reporter Hannah Nita, who was at that meeting for us last night. So what was the mood in that meeting, Hannah?
Good morning, Danny. Well, around 100 people were packed out in a room at the Cavendish Hotel in Eastbourne, and it was a real mixture of people who had lived in the town for years and are worried about their hospital being slowly downgraded, and also families and parents who have concerns about these changes to the hospital's short-stay paediatric assessment unit, and also the current closure until the end of the month at least of the midwifery-led unit there, birthing unit. Now, many people got emotional as they spoke, and they wanted to know why there hadn't been more consultation or transparency about these changes, which actually started to come in on Monday of this week. Now, 10 years ago, consultant-led maternity and paediatric services at the hospital were shifted to Hastings, and that left just one consultant running a short-stay paediatric unit in Eastbourne, along with a midwifery unit not led by a consultant as well. And these changes, that paediatric consultant will be replaced with specialist nurses. And there were big concerns, mainly from families who had children with complex medical needs or also on a low income. And the main worry was this downgrading of services very slowly, and also the length of the journey if they need to be transferred or go to appointments in Hastings to see the paediatric consultant. It's about an hour by car, but many of them didn't have cars. And then on public transport, you're talking well over an hour, sometimes 2 hours. And if you need to take a taxi, that is a big chunk of money. And there was some real concerns about that. And also how that impacts if you have a very poorly child and you need to make that journey. And the hospital, one lady, she lived opposite the hospital. She had a daughter with very complex needs, and she would then have to travel the journey, or she's worried she would have to travel the journey all the way to Hastings. Now, here's what some of the people there told us last night about what they want to happen now and why they felt they needed to be at this meeting.
Eastbourne is a growing town. We've had more schools starting. We've had some more special needs schools opening. We've had more houses being built, and yet we're actually reducing access to some very important children's services. Our children have got little enough voice as it is, especially children with special needs. And I think this is a time where actually, as a mum of our daughter, and also as a mother in general, I needed to stand up and say something.
We've lived in this area for quite a number of years. We've seen our local hospital downgraded. We have a large population in the Eastbourne area than in the Hastings area, and therefore, and particularly of children, I'm an ex-teacher. I've seen a lot of children needing care, and they need it here. We have lost other services, and we shouldn't.
Because I just think it's part of the cuts that just keep coming again and again and again, and I think people have opposed these before, but the cuts happen, and then there's another round, and very soon a town the size of Eastbourne, which is a large town, is going to have very little in the way of proper services at all at the hospital.
Going back to that level of care is absolutely really crucial. We cannot carry on with this situation we've got today. It's going to end up with lost lives.
So, Hannah, lots of concern for the people at that meeting last night. Was there one point that particularly stood out for you?
I mean, there were several points where people broke down when they were speaking because they felt so passionately about it. There was one parent who she had a disabled husband, and she had to get her daughter, who had epilepsy, to the Conquest because there wasn't a consultant in Eastbourne, and she remembers having to follow the ambulance because her husband had to go in the ambulance, and she was in her car, and as they drove along the road, her car broke down, and she was on a really low income. She couldn't afford to get it fixed, and she remembers being stranded in a town she didn't know while her daughter got taken to hospital and she couldn't be with them, and she says that wouldn't have happened if she could have got the care at Eastbourne, and that really stuck with me. And another one that really did was meeting Helen Diplock. She has a 7-year-old daughter who has complex medical needs, and she spoke about one incident where she had to drive her daughter to Hastings for care.
We then had to get a taxi from Eastbourne to Hastings because the ambulance was too long. It wasn't safe for me to drive her with her breathing. So we had to get a taxi, which I find unbelievable. But anyway, we then had amazing care. We spent 36 hours in hospital. We were discharged. 2 nights later, Rosie deteriorated about 9 p.m. I had to drive her in the night, in the dark, to Hastings to be seen, to be assessed, which is just ludicrous. For a town of this size, it's absolutely ludicrous. And just to be clear, I will not take Rosie to DGH A&E going forward because there is no one who can meet her complex medical needs. I will take her straight to Brighton, to the Royal Alex, or straight to Conquest. That means if Rosie is unwell, we either call an ambulance or I have to drive her over an hour. I'm fortunate that I can now drive. I couldn't when Rosie was first born. One of the things that I find particularly distressing is that the impact falls on those that are most vulnerable in our society. It falls on children who don't have their own voice. It falls on medically fragile children who already have the odds stacked against them. Sorry, I'm getting emotional. It also falls on the poor, on those that are socially isolated.
That's Helen Diplock speaking at that meeting last night. Now, we invited East Sussex Healthcare NHS Trust onto the programme today, but nobody was available. So I'll read out what they say in just a moment. But first, we'll talk to the Conservative MP for Eastbourne in a tick. But first, the person who organised that meeting yesterday, Josh Babarinde, the Liberal Democrats' prospective parliamentary candidate for Eastbourne, joins us now. Hello, Josh. Good morning.
Morning, Danny.
So give us your summary of what you heard last night and why you called that meeting in the first place.
Well, we've heard Hannah reporting back, as well as some of the attendees yesterday share their experiences, their views, their concerns about some of the proposals that have already begun to be implemented. The reason for calling the meeting was because it was absolutely clear to me that the public needed to have a say about these proposed changes to paediatric services in Eastbourne. The proposal to remove the on-site paediatric consultant, which could mean, many are worried, children and their families need to go to Hastings potentially to receive care that they can currently get in Eastbourne. That could pose risks to the quality of care. We heard a story from someone yesterday whose child was misdiagnosed over the phone. What the trust are saying is that it's okay, don't you worry, a consultant will be available over the phone to Eastbourne families at the DGH in place of them being there in person.
It's not quite the same sometimes, is it?
It's not quite the same. And we heard an account from somebody yesterday who gave an example of that. But then there are also concerns about access to care. If people do have to end up going to Hastings more than they already do, how are people going to afford to do that? The time it takes is horrendous, especially on public transport. This is a significant potential change, and that should warrant a full public consultation and a pause of these changes.
Right.
The Trust has said that they won't do the consultation. I held the meeting to make sure that the public could have their say.
Now, the Trust tell us they weren't actually invited to that meeting last night. Actually, if you had done that, it would have been useful for them to hear those first-hand accounts, wouldn't it?
Well, it was a public meeting. Everybody was invited.
Oh, so they could have come anyway.
Indeed, and they were invited to make a contribution to the meeting, or to share information, or to provide some materials or resources. They passed me their website, which I committed to sharing with attendees there. But what I would absolutely do is collate all of the stories that were shared last night. That's what we were doing. And I will present them not just to the Hospital Trust, but also to the Secretary of State for Health. Because I'm calling on the Secretary of State to use her powers to call this decision in. And
what does that
intervene.
mean? Explain that. You asked the Health Secretary to call in this decision. What does that mean they have to do then?
So what this would involve is the Health Secretary reviewing this decision and reviewing whether or not a pause needs to take place and whether or not a full consultation needs to take place. Usually these would be decisions that are made at a local level between the Hospital Trust, between the commissioners, and they have decided not to have that pause and consultation. So I'm asking for the Health Secretary to intervene to give us what not just I am calling for, but many parents, many carers, and many clinicians who were in the room yesterday are calling for too.
What are you feeling about what the Health Secretary will do on the back of that?
Well, I hope that she'll listen to every single word of the emotional stories that were shared yesterday. I'm going to make sure that she gets all of those and hand her all of those accounts. And I think, to me, it's impossible not to be moved by them and not to see that it's critical that the public need to have a say. Our meeting drew lots of people from across town, but there are many more who need to input as well. And I hope that the Health Secretary hears that call and responds to it with the right decision.
Josh Babarinde, thank you for now. Joining us is also Conservative MP for Eastbourne, Caroline Ansell. Caroline, good morning to you.
Good morning, Danny.
Hiya. Do you share Josh's concerns there?
Well, I've certainly heard from parents across the town. I've heard their concerns. I've already spoken with the Health Secretary, but I'm working closely with the Trust. I'm working with the Minister who's responsible for paediatrics on this. And of course, listening to parents, I have my heart aches for them because I've been that mum. My own child has complex medical needs. So I understand that any change that is brought in is going to be sort of super sensitive.
Can you support this decision then? Because if there's no consultant for the kids at the DGH, but even if they're better trained nurses in paediatrics, that's not the same as a consultant, is it?
No, it's not the same. But the reason why to date there hasn't been that public consultation, and I should just say, I am calling this in formally, and I have spoken already with the Secretary of State for Health on this. But the reason why it hasn't gone out to further and wider public consultation locally is because this is not being recognised as a significant change or a movement of services to conquest by our local health commissioners, or indeed by East Sussex Health Overview Scrutiny Committee, who were concerned about how deliverable this was. They were concerned about the timescale. They've asked important questions, and they have committed to undertake a review. But we don't have that recognition at this point that this represents a major change. And the Trust themselves are at pains to say this isn't service change, and they're very concerned that families make decisions then and don't come into the DGH in the normal way, because they are saying those services are still there for these children. But of course, I am going to go full tonto on every and any lever that I have to make sure these services are safe and that parents and children can get the right care in the right place at the right time. You'll know this has been my top priority all my years as MP. And this hospital trust has come from 2015, special measures, to now good and outstanding. And there is serious investment coming forward in the shape of our new hospital. So I want for local people to know that this is a top priority and that there are all the right expert services for us here.
But if the consultant is not at the DGH when a child really needs to see a consultant, that still presents an issue. Does the consultant travel over to Eastbourne? No, the parent and the child will have to go to the Conquest.
Well, of course, some of these clinical sort of challenges are very much for the trust to answer. And I know that the trust is working with individual families, particularly those families whose children have the most complex needs.
Well, it could be any child, couldn't it, at any time who turns up at the DGH that needs a consultant to diagnose them.
Which is why, of course, I have made that referral. But the trust will say that they are providing the right skill set. And I think even critics of some of the plans will recognise that there are some important developments here. There are some important principles around making sure that there is that sort of co-location. But there are some real challenges for the trust here too. They need to win hearts and minds, and they have responded to that request for a pause in part, but only in part. But they have responded. And of course, they will be back at the Health Overview Scrutiny Committee in East Sussex to provide far more by way of insight because of this review. But our local commissioners, because I've spoken to them too, there is no one I have not kind of banged on their door, because I want to be confident that the right services are available here at the right time. So nothing is more important to me than families and these children. So I can assure parents out there listening that I hear them, and I have taken their concerns straight to Westminster, but I am working locally with everyone who has a part to play in any of these decisions.
Let's see if you can get the result. Thank you for now. Caroline Ansell there, the Conservative MP for Eastbourne, with us on BBC Radio Sussex. Your reaction to that, 0800 232 1045. Get in touch.
Coming up.